Dad slipped powder into my drink. At my early birthday, thinking I'd die before my $12,250,000 trust unlocked. I turned his trap against him and watched cops arrest him as everyone gasped. Their empire crumbled instantly. Hey Reddit, figured I'd finally share this mess because, honestly, it still feels unreal sometimes. My family's always been complicated. Strict, controlling, the kind of people who care more about appearances than actual relationships. I spent years being treated like the screw-up no matter what I did. Then came this one celebration they threw for me, and let's just say things didn't exactly go the way they planned. What followed turned my whole life upside down. So I, Daniel, 22 male, just wrapped up my degree in bioethics, which is basically the one field guaranteed to piss off my family. If you're imagining warm hugs, proud parents, family dinners with laughter, nah, wrong movie. My family runs like a hostile takeover meeting that never ends. Think less loving household, more corporate Shark Tank. Let me give you the cast of clowns. My dad, Carlos Harris, the kind of guy who could sell a starving kid a diet plan and then brag about providing opportunity. A CEO of Harris Biotech, which sounds respectable on paper until you realize the whole operation runs on intimidation, loopholes, and whatever shady science he can shove through regulators before they catch up. He loves suits, loves control, and loves being called visionary. To me, he's just a control freak who'd bulldoze anyone in the way of his next profit margin. Then there's Victoria, my mom. If you asked her to describe herself, she'd say, pillar of high society. If you asked me, I'd say, professional image manager with no soul. She's obsessed with appearances, always putting together events, charity brunches, and getting our family's photo in magazines. Finally, Clara, my older sister by 3 years and the family's golden child. Harvard MBA, joined the company right out of school, and somehow has our parents' undivided attention no matter what. She could break into Fort Knox and Dad would frame it as leadership initiative. Me? I could win a Nobel Prize, and he'd ask why my tie looked crooked in the acceptance photo. Growing up in this circus, it was obvious what the plan was. Dad wanted Clara handling the business side, and me locked in a lab pumping out research that kept the machine running. Two sides of the Harris Empire, he'd say, like he was writing a movie trailer. Except I wasn't interested in being a supporting actor in his little empire flick. That's why I chose bioethics. I wanted to study the actual consequences of science, how to make sure research isn't run like a death lottery for profit. Dad called it idealistic nonsense. Mom said I was embarrassing the family legacy. Clara just smirked like she'd won some competition I didn't sign up for. But here's the part they'll never admit out loud. They're scared of me. Not in the I'm gonna punch them out way, but because I know too much. When your family business has been circling rumors of illegal human trials overseas, whispers about organ trafficking connections, and straight-up stealing biotech patents from smaller labs, a son studying ethics and medicine is basically a time bomb. I didn't have a full proof chain yet, just enough breadcrumbs to see the picture and to get the cops interested. But tonight was the closer. And that's the thing. I wasn't bitter. I stopped being bitter a long time ago. I just got smart about it. I learned to keep quiet, nod along at their family vision speeches, and then do my own thing. When you grow up with two people who see you as a problem to be managed instead of a son, you stop trying to win them over. You start planning. Let me paint one more picture of how warped things were. When I was in high school, I got first place at a science fair with a project about pharmaceutical waste and environmental damage. I came home buzzing, holding my medal like it actually meant something. Dad didn't even look up from his paper, just muttered, "That's what's expected of a Harris." Now, if you're wondering how I stayed sane, the answer's simple. I leaned into it. You start to notice stuff when you're on the outside looking in. The late-night hushed phone calls, the sudden overseas research partnerships, the way lawsuits against the company would vanish overnight. They thought I wasn't paying attention. Joke's on them. I was cataloging everything. By the time I was finishing college, I'd built myself into the one thing they couldn't stand, someone they couldn't control. I had my degree, I had friends outside their bubble, and I had no intention of ever stepping foot into their shiny glass towers to work for them. And here's where it gets interesting. While I was busy carving out my independence, they were busy panicking. Because it wasn't just me walking away from the company that scared them. It was the fact that I might actually use what I knew. And if the whispers about off-the-books experiments and missing patients were even half true, they had a lot to lose. So yeah, that's the setup. A family empire built on lies, a golden child who played along, and me, the inconvenient son with a sharp tongue and no loyalty. You could say I was the black sheep, but honestly, I liked being the wolf at the edge of their perfect little pasture. And I had no idea just how far they were willing to go to cut me out of the picture. The first real sign came when my parents suddenly decided to celebrate me. That alone should have set off alarms. These are people who forgot my 18th birthday until my grandma reminded them. But now, out of nowhere, they were throwing me an early 22nd birthday party. Early, as in weeks before the actual day. Who even does that? Normal families wait until the actual birthday. Mine schedules it like a board meeting with fake smiles and catered menus. Family tradition, my mom said when she called. Which was funny, because the only family tradition I remembered was them reminding me how much better Clara's grades were compared to mine. I knew something was off the second I walked into the venue. They'd rented out one of those over-the-top banquet halls downtown. Chandeliers bigger than my apartment. The kind of place where even the bathroom soap feels like it costs more than your car. And here's the thing. It wasn't even a birthday vibe. No balloons, no cake, no happy birthday Daniel banner. It looked like a corporate fundraiser. The guest list backed it up too. I saw maybe 4 cousins, a couple of family friends, and then a whole army of business associates, investors, and random suits I'd never seen before. Some of them didn't even know my name. They'd shake my hand and say, "You must be the young Harris," like I was a prize show dog. I played along. They weren't celebrating me. They were showcasing me. Like, look at our son, the brilliant scholar, part of the Harris brand. Except I wasn't part of their brand. And that's what made the whole thing hilarious to me. But the real reason for the sudden family love fest? That took me back to Grandpa Paul. See, my grandfather was the only one who ever treated me like a human being. Old school guy, worked hard, didn't care much for all the corporate posturing. Before he died, he set up a trust fund for me. Not a couple $1,000, not a college savings plan. $12 million. Locked up until I either turned 22 or finished college, whichever came last. Ironclad. No loopholes. Here's the part my parents loved. If I didn't make it to 22, the trust didn't vanish. It reverted to them. So basically, me being alive and independent equaled me being rich and free from their control. Me not making it? They'd pocket the money and roll on like nothing happened. And wouldn't you know it? This early birthday party just happened to be scheduled right before my actual birthday. The timing was too perfect, too suspicious. I watched them closely that night. Dad was in his usual power stance, phone in hand, fake laugh whenever a big investor made a joke. Mom floated around the room like she owned the place, kissing cheeks, complimenting outfits, making sure the photographers caught her best angles. But what they couldn't hide was how often their eyes landed on me. Not the proud parent type of stare. More like they were waiting for me to step onto a landmine. Clara was there too, of course. She gave me the same polite smile she always did, the one that said, "I don't get why you keep fighting them. Just play the game." She had no idea what was coming, but I could tell she sensed something was brewing. Meanwhile, I stuck with my friends, 2 people who'd been my actual family during college. They were the only reason I didn't walk out of that party 10 minutes in. It was either laugh at it or lose my mind. But underneath the sarcasm, my brain was buzzing. Why now? Why this big display? They didn't do things out of kindness. Every move they made was calculated. And with Grandpa Paul's trust kicking in soon, the calculation was obvious. I'll be honest, I started feeling the weight of it right then. You ever get that vibe where you're at your own party, but you know it's not really for you? Like you're the prop in someone else's performance? That's exactly how it felt. All eyes on me, but none of it felt real. Then came the whispers. Not the literal kind. I didn't catch full conversations, but the energy. People leaning in too close with my dad, laughing nervously. My mom pulling the event planner aside, looking stressed. My sister staring at me 1 second, then pretending to be interested in a conversation across the room. It all added up. My parents weren't celebrating me turning 22. They were racing the clock before I hit it. And that trust fund wasn't just money. It was freedom, leverage, and proof that I could live without them. That scared them more than anything. And the way they hovered that night, watching my every move, that's when I realized something serious was coming. I didn't know exactly what yet, but I knew one thing. Whatever their plan was, they were running out of time. That's when my dad tapped his glass with a spoon. The whole room went quiet, like he was about to deliver some big, inspiring speech. He stood there, squared shoulders, chin up, doing that fake charismatic thing he always pulled when he wanted people to see him as a leader. "Before we wrap up this wonderful evening," he said, voice loud enough to carry, "I'd like to invite the family for a private toast. A very special toast for Daniel." The crowd clapped politely. Some people even cheered. I kept my face straight, but inside, that was the red flag. Dad doesn't do special anything for me. The fact he wanted a family-only toast was practically a neon sign screaming, "This is it." The waiters rolled out a little cart with a bottle sitting in the middle, all dramatic, like it was some sacred relic. Dark label, gold trim, the kind of bottle that screams exclusive. Dad made a point of telling the crowd it was a rare bottle reserved for important occasions. Mom had already vetted the staff weeks ago. NDAs signed, security locked down. They thought they were safe. Yeah, sure. Important occasions like poisoning your own kid. We walked over to the corner they'd set up. Me, Dad, Mom, and Clara. My two best friends, Chris and Tommy, drifted closer, pretending to grab snacks but really watching. I slipped my phone out under the table and fired off a quick text to them. Watch closely. Follow me after. Don't ask. Just trust me. 2 read receipts popped up instantly. Good. At least I wasn't going into this alone. Dad gave the drinks himself, real careful, handed Clara hers first, then Mom's, then finally placed one in my hand. That's when I saw it. Not a swirl, more like a faint shimmer at the bottom, almost like the light caught it wrong. Barely noticeable, but enough if you were paying attention. My heart didn't race. My hands didn't shake. I just looked at it and thought, nice try, old man. I held it up like I was admiring the color, buying myself a second. Dad raised his glass and locked eyes with me, giving me that tight smile. To Daniel, he said, may your future be everything you deserve. That line almost made me laugh out loud. Everything I deserve? Yeah, I bet. I raised the glass to my lips, tilted it just enough so it looked like I took a sip. I palmed the glass low, then swapped it smoothly with the one Dad had set down behind him. Years of pretending to go along with their crap had taught me one thing. You get good at looking like you're doing what they want, while actually doing the opposite. I fake sipped, swapped mine for Dad's clean glass, then palmed the poisoned one back, kept it in hand just so I could spill it later. Nobody noticed, not Mom with her fake smile, not Clara, who looked slightly confused but didn't say anything, and definitely not Dad, who looked like he'd just won. I leaned back, gave a little sigh, then let my body start to slump. That's when the show began. First, I let my head dip forward, like I was suddenly dizzy. Then, I blinked a few times. Slow and heavy. Ugh, feel weird, I muttered, just loud enough for them to hear. Mom's eyes went wide for half a second before she forced the mask back on. Dad stepped closer, pretending to look concerned, but his jaw was tight, eyes locked on me like he was waiting for the finish. Clara froze, glass halfway to her mouth. I clutched my stomach, staggered a little, let my knees buckle like I was fighting to stay upright. Something's wrong, I groaned, dragging the word out. Out of the corner of my eye, I saw Chris and Tommy. They weren't smiling anymore. They'd picked up on it instantly. Chris nudged Tommy and I knew they were locked in. Witnesses, just like I needed. I coughed hard, made it sound rough and raw, then knocked into the table like I lost control. The glass tipped, spilling liquid across the cloth. Perfect. Now it looked like the poison hit me fast and hard. Chris, sharp as ever, slipped closer. Out of the corner of my eye, I caught him drape a napkin over the tipped glass and the soaked tablecloth. He snapped a quick photo and slid both into a zip bag he'd pulled from his jacket, hands off the rim, clean for evidence. The guy thought 2 steps ahead, just like I needed. Daniel! Mom hissed, grabbing my arm. But it wasn't panic in her voice, it was irritation, like she was annoyed the act wasn't going smoothly. Dad leaned down, putting on his concerned dad voice for anyone watching. Son, are you all right? You don't look well. You... But his eyes gave him away. There wasn't fear in them. There was calculation. I slumped into the chair, breathing heavy, one hand on my chest. What did you give me? I whispered, making it sound like the words were barely scraping out. My stomach wasn't churning. My chest wasn't tight. I felt fine, but I made sure they thought otherwise. My breaths came ragged, uneven, my hands shaking as I fumbled with the glass. It was almost fun in a twisted way, acting like I was seconds from keeling over, while watching them wrestle between keeping up the performance for guests and finally letting their guard down. Dad crouched lower, face tight, whispering just enough so he thought only we could hear. Stay calm. Just a little longer. Chris and Tommy had both stepped closer now, hovering by the edge of the circle, pretending to be casual but keeping their eyes glued to me. Good. Every second of this mattered. I coughed again, harsher, and leaned forward like I was about to collapse completely. What did you do? I rasped. Mom's lips twitched, Dad's eyes flicked to hers, and I saw it. the tiniest crack in the mask. For the first time all night, their confidence slipped. I kept pushing, coughing harder, forcing my breaths to sound weaker. My vision wasn't blurred, but I made it look like I was struggling to focus. What was in it? I asked again, my voice barely audible. And that's when Dad's face changed. Not fear, not concern, satisfaction. Like he thought the job was already done. And me? Inside, I was grinning like crazy. Because the real show was just getting started. Dad glanced around the room, then whispered harshly, "Help me get him out of sight." Mom grabbed one arm, Dad took the other, and Clara trailed after us, pale and jittery. To the guests, it probably looked like worried parents helping their son to a quiet spot. They even pasted on fake, panicked frowns and rehearsed concern as they steered me toward a side hallway. I let my legs drag, my head hanging, every movement weak and sluggish. Chris and Tommy caught the signal. They slipped away from the main crowd, circling wide and shadowing us. Nobody noticed them weaving in, not with all eyes still on the leftover speeches and dessert trays. Dad muttered, "Private room. Now." They pushed through a side door into one of the smaller lounges. Dim lighting, leather chairs, a long table stacked with untouched hors d'oeuvres. The door shut behind us. They laid me onto a couch. My body sagged like dead weight, breaths uneven, eyes half-lidded. I forced my lips to tremble as I rasped, "What did you do to me?" That one line hit like a hammer. Mom froze for a second, then knelt by the couch, gripping my wrist like she was checking a pulse. Clara stood stiff, eyes darting between them and me, completely out of her depth. Dad crouched close, lowering his voice. "Relax, Daniel. Just write it out." My hand twitched against my chest. What was in it?" I croaked, louder this time. I made my body jerk once, like my muscles were rebelling. Mom sighed, almost annoyed. "You had to be stubborn, didn't you? Always poking your nose where it doesn't belong." Dad cut her a look. "Victoria." But I caught the crack in her tone, so I pushed harder. "Why?" I whispered, letting my head slump sideways. Dad's mask slipped completely now. He leaned in, whispering like a man who thought he'd already won. "Because you couldn't leave it alone. The research, the files, the trials you weren't supposed to know about." My pulse stayed steady, but I made sure my breath sounded shorter, ragged. "Trials?" Clara's voice was shaky. "Dad, what are you saying?" She'd been groomed on the business side, sure, but everything sensitive lived 2 floors above her clearance. She saw smoke, never the fire. He snapped at her. "Don't act surprised, Clara. You've lived under this roof long enough to know. He was about to ruin everything. The patents we pulled from competitors, all of it. He thinks bioethics makes him some kind of savior." "Grandpa's trust?" I murmured. Mom sneered, her hand tightening on mine. "Yes, that ridiculous clause. $12 million, completely yours the moment you turn 22. And once you had that money, there'd be no controlling you. No way to keep you quiet. You'd run off, expose us, and destroy Harris Biotech." Dad's jaw tightened, but he didn't stop her. He stepped back, straightened his suit, and exhaled like a man unburdened. "You were a problem, Daniel. An unnecessary risk. You just couldn't leave it alone. After tonight, there won't be any more problems." Clara shook her head slowly, disbelief painted across her face. "You drugged him? At his birthday? You're insane." Dad shot her a glare sharp enough to cut steel. "You think we had a choice? Do you understand what he had in his hands? Notes about those clinical trials, whispers about the organ procurement, the patents. He was 2 steps away from burning everything down. Sometimes you have to do what's necessary." I let my body convulse once, a low groan slipping out. Inside, though, I was grinning. Every word was gold. Confession after confession, each one slipping out easier than the last. They thought I was slipping into the void, too far gone to matter. Mom leaned in closer, brushing hair off my forehead like some tragic performance. "Don't fight it. Just close your eyes. It's better this way, Daniel. You'll never know the damage you could have caused." Clara's face twisted, eyes darting toward the door. She wanted out, but Dad's presence locked her in place. Meanwhile, on the far side of the lounge, the door cracked open just enough for 2 silhouettes to slip inside. Chris and Tommy. Silent, blending with the shadows, phones angled low. Witnesses. Insurance. I let out a wheeze and muttered again, "Why, me?" Dad laughed softly, almost bitter. "Because you wouldn't play your part. We gave you every chance and you chose to be difficult, to chase ideals instead of profit. You were never going to fit, Daniel. And now, you never will." Mom squeezed my wrist once more, whispering, It's already done. I let my body go limp, eyes fluttering shut, chest rising shallow. Their expressions shifted. Mom's smug calm, Dad's grim satisfaction, Clara's pale horror, and I stayed still, soaking in their words, letting them believe the trap had closed, because they'd just buried themselves deeper than they ever imagined. I let the silence hang for a few more seconds, chest rising shallow like I was taking my last breaths. Dad and Mom exchanged one of those smug looks couples share when they think they've won. Clara stood frozen, arms crossed over herself, eyes darting between me and them. Then I sat up straight, just like that. I rolled my shoulders, cleared my throat, and leaned back into the couch like I'd just finished a nap. Their faces. Man, I wish I could have taken a picture. Mom's lips parted, her eyes huge, horror spilling across her face. Dad blinked once, twice, and his smug mask cracked right down the middle. I smirked, stretched my arms lazily, and said, "Wow, that was Oscar-worthy, wasn't it? Thought I was gone for a second there myself." Dad stumbled back a step, his hand tightening into a fist at his side. Mom whispered, "Impossible." The door creaked open wider, and in stepped Chris and Tommy, no longer bothering to hide. Chris had his phone raised slightly, still recording. Tommy shoved it into his pocket, shaking his head. "Dude," Tommy said flatly, glaring at my parents. "We heard everything. You two are sick." Mom's hands flew up like she wanted to explain, but Dad cut her off, voice low and sharp. "You little bastard!" I leaned forward, elbows on my knees, grinning. "Little bastard who just got you both to admit you drugged me because you're scared of your golden empire crumbling. Oh, and let's not forget, organ trafficking, stolen biotech patents, human trials, real casual dinner topics, huh?" Clara finally found her voice. I didn't know." I cut her a look. "You'll get your chance to explain later. But them?" I jabbed a finger at Dad and Mom. "They just handed me the confession of the century." Chris crossed his arms, jaw tight. "Whole thing's on video, every word." Dad lunged a step toward him. "Give me that phone." Chris didn't flinch. "Nah, this one's backed up already." I stood up, slow and steady, straightening my jacket. The weakness was gone, replaced with deliberate confidence. I wanted them to see how sharp, how alive, how untouchable I really was. "You know," I said casually, "for people who like to brag about being geniuses, you're really easy to play." I fake a cough, throw in some shaky breathing, and boom. You spill your entire evil villain monologue like it's amateur night. Mom's face twisted, caught between fury and panic. "Daniel, listen!" I raised a hand, cutting her off. "Nah, I've listened to you my whole life. You two only ever cared about control. Guess what? That leash snapped tonight." Without waiting for a response, I opened the lounge door and walked back into the main hall. My steps were steady, my smirk locked in place. Chris and Tommy followed close behind, Clara trailing in shock. The room fell silent. Guests who had been laughing and mingling turned, watching me reappear looking completely fine. Whispers rippled through the crowd. A few people frowned, confused. 10 minutes ago, I looked like I was keeling over, and now I was standing tall like nothing happened. Dad and Mom stepped out a second later, both pale and stiff, trying to paste their masks back on. I spread my arms wide to the guests, flashing my best grin. "Relax, everybody. Nothing to worry about." I let the pause drag, then added loud enough for every ear in the room. "Just my parents trying to kill me." You know, normal family bonding. The reaction was instant. Gasps, hands over mouths, a couple glasses clinking to the floor. My old professor, Dr. Lewis, stood frozen by the buffet table, his jaw literally dropping. "What?" someone shouted. Chris piped up from behind me. "He's not joking. We've got it recorded," they confessed. Tommy nodded, arms crossed. "It's all real." All eyes snapped to my parents. Mom's smile cracked like glass, wobbling on her lips. Dad opened his mouth, but no words came out. His face had gone a shade of red that looked painful. I tilted my head, smirking right at them. "Go on, Dad. Tell them I'm making it up. I'm sure they'll believe you over the video, the witnesses, and, oh yeah, the fact you've been circling the drain with your shady research." Mom tried to laugh it off, but her voice shook. "Oh, Daniel, always the dramatist." "Save it," I cut in sharp. "You already confessed. Don't bother trying to rewrite the script." And I leaned casually against the nearest table, arms folded. "You spent my whole life trying to make me feel small, trying to convince me I'd never measure up. Guess what? I'm still standing. And you two? You just destroyed yourselves." The orchestra in the corner had stopped mid-song. The only sound was the whispers, the shuffling, and my father's ragged breathing. For once, I wasn't the quiet, overlooked son. I was the one holding every card, and they knew it. I didn't even have to drag things out, because right on cue, the cops showed up. Two uniformed officers came through the main entrance with a detective right behind them. Not some random coincidence. I'd tipped them off days earlier. They already had an investigation brewing, stacking evidence piece by piece. Warrants were signed that afternoon. Tonight was just the planned moment to serve them once both of my parents were in the same place. The second people saw badges, the crowd split like the Red Sea. Guests moved back muttering, some clutching their phones like they were about to record history. Detective Rivera, liaison with the Joint City Federal Task Force, scanned the room, eyes sharp. Carlos Harris. Victoria Harris. Step forward. We have signed warrants. Fraud, conspiracy, and unlawful human experimentation, with additional federal counts pending. Dad puffed his chest, like intimidation still worked. This is a private party. You have no... Save it, Rivera cut in, flipping open a folder. Carlos Harris, Victoria Harris. You're under arrest for fraud, conspiracy, and unlawful human experimentation. She didn't even blink. The buzz in the room turned into a low roar. People stared like they'd just learned aliens were real. Mom went pale, her hand clutching at Dad's sleeve. He stayed frozen, jaw tight, but I could see it, the little twitch in his eye. The first crack of real fear. The officers moved in. Handcuffs clicked. The sound was sharper than the orchestra had been all night. Guests gasped, some whispering, some pulling out phones. Dr. Lewis just stood there shaking his head, like all his suspicions were finally confirmed. I leaned back against the table, arms crossed, and said loud enough for the nearest people to hear, "Man, that reputation crumbled fast. Whole life building a perfect image, and it only takes 10 minutes for the world to see the truth." A few people chuckled nervously. Others just stared at me like I'd grown fangs. But nobody looked at my parents with respect anymore. Whatever power they'd held in this room was gone. Mom tried one last desperate act, sobbing loudly, "This is a mistake! We're respected! We're philanthropists!" Rivera didn't even flinch. "You're criminals. And now you'll face it." They were walked straight through the hall, out past every guest they'd tried so hard to impress. Some people actually stepped back, like my parents were contagious. Others just shook their heads in disgust. And me? I stayed put, calm, almost casual, while everyone's eyes flicked back to me. The forgotten son, the black sheep, the one who just pulled the curtain down. The media storm hit faster than I expected. Overnight, the Harris name went from untouchable to radioactive. Business partners bailed. Charities dropped their names, and politicians who used to brag about being close family friends suddenly claimed they barely knew them. By the end of the week, regulators stepped in and froze half their projects, and I mocked every second of it. Not online, I didn't need to, but to myself, to my friends, to Clara. Watching their empire burn from inside out was better than anything I could have planned. "Guess the mask slipped," I told Chris the next day, showing him a headline with Dad's mugshot. He laughed so hard he spit his coffee. Clara, though, wasn't laughing. She looked wrecked, pale, quiet, staring at the screen like she'd woken up in some nightmare. "I defended them," she muttered. "I thought they were just strict, controlling. I had no idea." I shrugged. "I tried telling you. You didn't want to hear it." Her eyes met mine, shaky but steady. "You were right. About all of it." She rubbed her temples. "I'll testify. Whatever they need. I can't pretend anymore." And she did. When detectives sat her down, she confirmed everything she'd overheard in that lounge. Chris and Tommy backed it up too, handing over their videos and retelling the details word for word. They didn't hold back, said it straight, like guys who weren't afraid of calling out corruption. The case piled up fast. Between the recordings, the paperwork the feds had already been digging through, and now eyewitness testimony, my parents didn't stand a chance. At one point, I caught Clara scrolling through an old photo album. There was a picture of all of us smiling at some Christmas event years ago. Dad holding a plaque, Mom clutching a bouquet. Perfect image. Perfect lie. She slammed the album shut. They weren't parents. They were actors. I didn't argue. She was right. What stuck with me most, though, was how quick the switch happened. These people spent decades crafting their image. Charities, donations, magazine features. And it all disintegrated the moment truth hit the air. No second chances. No sympathy. Just collapse. And I couldn't help rubbing it in. To anyone who asked, I'd smirk and say, "Yeah, my folks built an empire." Turns out it was made of sand. For the first time in my life, I wasn't living under their shadow. I was standing on top of it. That feeling stuck with me in the days that followed. For the first time, I wasn't the background character in my own life. I wasn't the disappointment, or the stubborn one, or whatever label my parents liked to throw on me when they needed to feel superior. I was the one who pulled the thread and watched their whole costume unravel. I didn't shed a tear. If anything, I enjoyed watching the collapse. All those years, my parents told me, legacy is everything, and the Harris name stands for excellence. The trust from Grandpa Paul came through right on time. As soon as I hit 22, Council wired it within 2 weeks. Grandpa's ironclad language left no wiggle room. No delays, no loopholes, no excuses. It was mine, free and clear. Ironclad, just like the old man had planned. I half expected there to be some hidden clause my parents had slipped in. But no, it was mine. No strings attached. For the first time, I felt completely untouchable. They couldn't control me with money anymore. They couldn't dangle opportunities, couldn't hold tuition over my head, couldn't guilt me with family duty. Their leash had snapped, and I had the whole damn field to run. Clara came by one night, looking smaller than I'd ever seen her. No perfect makeup, no business-ready outfit, just a hoodie and jeans sitting stiff on my couch. She stared at the floor for a while before finally saying, "I don't know how to undo all the years I defended them." I leaned back, arms crossed. "You don't. You just move forward." Her eyes flicked up, glassy. "I'll testify at trial. I'll tell them everything I know. That's the least I can do." I nodded. "Good. That's how you start fixing it." She stayed quiet for a while, then added, "I used to think you were jealous. Bitter. I told myself Mom and Dad were harsh because they wanted the best for us. But you were right all along. I didn't rub it in. Didn't need to." The guilt written all over her face said enough. Chris and Tommy never let me forget how wild the party night had been. "Dude," Tommy said, laughing, "the way you just sat up like nothing happened? Funniest thing I've ever seen." Chris grinned, shaking his head. "And your dad's face?" Looked like he'd seen a ghost. They were the kind of friends who made sure I didn't get too lost in the chaos. Every time the weight of it all started pressing in, they reminded me that I'd survived it and flipped it back on them. The trial itself was dragged out. Prosecutors stacked the charges high: fraud, conspiracy, and yes, attempted murder. The organ trafficking piece hit the hardest. Turns out, buried contracts and shady suppliers painted a picture even worse than I imagined. Watching my parents sit in court, stiff and expressionless, was almost surreal. The same people who used to look down at me now looked like aging criminals waiting for sentencing. When Clara took the stand, her voice cracked at first. But then she found her footing. She told the court about the whispers she'd overheard, the documents she'd seen but didn't understand, the way Mom and Dad had plotted behind closed doors. Chris and Tommy followed, calm and steady, telling their side of the story about the lounge, the confession, the whole act. I didn't testify that day. I didn't need to. I'd already done enough. My part was just sitting there, watching them squirm, knowing there was no way out. The verdict was guilty across the board. The Harris name was officially toast. Afterward, Clara sat beside me on the courthouse steps, reporters buzzing in the distance. She whispered, "What do we even do now?" I looked straight ahead. "Whatever we want. For once, it's our choice." That was the truth. The money gave me freedom, sure, but the real win was knowing I'd never have to bend to them again. Their legacy was ashes, and I was free to build something real. I started talking with firms about bioethics, focusing on exposing the same kind of garbage my parents built their empire on. Clean projects, accountability, transparency, the exact opposite of the Harris way. Clara even hinted she might follow a similar path, maybe law, maybe advocacy. Watching her crack that perfect daughter shell and start thinking for herself was almost as satisfying as seeing our parents cuffed. The story eventually faded from the headlines, replaced by whatever new scandal came along. That was fine by me. Let the world move on. I'd already won where it mattered. Sometimes I think back to that night. The lights, the toast, the fake coughs, the act that fooled them. I remember Dad's smug face when he thought I was fading, and the shock when I stood up straight with that smirk. That moment right there, that was the turning point. Because for once, I wasn't reacting to them. They were reacting to me. And they'll keep reacting to me for the rest of their miserable lives, whether they rot in prison or not. I walked away from the courthouse that day with Chris and Tommy at my side, Clara trailing a few steps behind. No leash, no shadow, no more manipulation. Just me, free and clear, finally in control. And honestly, that's better than any revenge I could have dreamed up. YouTube just dropped this new hype feature. If you're hooked on this story, smash that hype button. It tells YouTube this video deserves to blow up, and it keeps even crazier stories coming your way.